Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear brothers and sisters, and welcome back to the Islamic SHAHADA channel. In the late autumn of 2025, America finds itself at a crossroads. The echoes of a tumultuous political era have not faded. Instead, they have settled into a complex, nationwide soul-searching, forcing a fundamental question upon its people. What does it mean to be American now? This is a period of profound recalibration, where cities and states across the Union are becoming laboratories for new political ideas, new coalitions, and new voices demanding to be heard. But nowhere is this redefinition more vivid, more charged, and more consequential than in the dense, unforgiving, and ever-changing landscape of New York City. Beneath the familiar noise of its 5 boroughs, a seismic shift in power is underway. It is a change that wasn't born in the boardrooms of Wall Street or the newsrooms of Manhattan, but was forged in the community centers, the local mosques, and the working-class neighborhoods of the outer boroughs. A community, long defined by the shadow of a national tragedy and forced into a posture of defense for over 2 decades, is now seizing political power on its own terms. This is the New York Muslim awakening, a historic transformation from the margins to the mainstream, from a silent, often vilified minority into a formidable and sophisticated political force. It is the story of a generation that refused to inherit the fears of its elders and decided instead to inherit and shape the future. At the epicenter of this political earthquake stands a single figure, not as a distant official or a mere beneficiary of the moment, but as its chief architect and its most potent symbol, Zohran Mamdani. His rise represents far more than just an electoral victory. His identity, as a 34-year-old son of immigrants, as a proud Muslim who embraces his faith as a wellspring of justice, and as an unapologetic democratic socialist, is inextricably woven into the very fabric of this movement. He is successfully channeling the collective experience of a community that has endured state surveillance, public suspicion, and political marginalization, and is forging that pain and resilience into a bold, progressive political agenda that speaks to New Yorkers of all faiths and backgrounds. This documentary, therefore, is an exploration of that very journey. It will investigate how New York's Muslim community navigated the transition from a necessary, defensive posture, a politics of survival, into becoming a proactive and agenda-setting force in one of the most powerful cities on earth. This is not simply the story of one man's ascent to power. It is the story of how an entire community found its voice, and how that voice is now beginning to fundamentally redefine the political landscape. This is the story of the New York Muslim awakening, and how Zohran Mamdani is defining the next chapter. To understand the rise of Zohran Mamdani and the political awakening he represents, one must first understand the ground from which this movement grew. It is a story that begins not in 2025, but in the immediate searing aftermath of September 11, 2001. While Ground Zero was a scar on the national psyche, for New York City's 1 million Muslims, it was also the epicenter of a new and insidious kind of fear. In the years that followed, the very air of the city changed for them. A pervasive Islamophobia bled into the fabric of daily life, transforming neighbors into suspects and places of worship into points of interest for law enforcement. This wasn't just a feeling, it was official city policy. The New York Police Department, the NYPD, instituted a mass surveillance program of unprecedented scale, secretly mapping Muslim communities, infiltrating mosques, and monitoring student associations. This dragnet surveillance had a profound chilling effect, creating a climate where public expressions of faith or political dissent were fraught with risk. This environment gave rise to what can only be described as a politics of survival. For nearly 2 decades, the primary political posture of the Muslim community was necessarily defensive. The goal was not to shape the city's agenda, but simply to exist safely within it. Community leaders focused on proving their patriotism, on building interfaith alliances to vouch for their humanity, and on navigating the complex legal and social minefields designed to contain them. It was a strategy of keeping a low profile, of avoiding controversy, and of hoping that assimilation and quiet contribution would eventually overcome public suspicion. This was not a passive choice, but a calculated response to an existential threat. The energy of the community was consumed by protecting itself from the outside, leaving little room to build political power from within. That defensive crouch was shattered by the political ascent of Donald Trump. His campaign and subsequent presidency acted as a powerful and painful catalyst. The subtle, coded Islamophobia of the previous era was replaced by overt, unapologetic hostility from the highest office in the land. The rhetoric that Islam hates us made it brutally clear that no amount of quiet assimilation would ever be enough. The tipping point arrived in January 2017 with Executive Order 13,769, known globally as the Muslim ban. This was not a covert surveillance program. It was a federal gate slamming shut, explicitly targeting individuals based on their national origin and, implicitly, their faith. The scenes of chaos and protest that erupted at JFK and airports nationwide marked a profound strategic awakening. It was in these protests that a new consciousness was forged. The politics of survival had failed. The community realized that fighting from the outside, through defensive protests and legal challenges, was no longer sufficient. The very system that had marginalized them now had to be entered, contested, and ultimately wielded for their own protection and empowerment. A critical mass of young activists, organizers, and future leaders concluded that true safety would not be granted by others. It had to be won through political representation. The question was no longer simply, how do we resist, but how do we govern? This fundamental shift, from protest to power, from reacting to the agenda to setting it, is the single most important precondition for the emergence of the New York Muslim awakening and the rise of a new generation of leaders like Zohran Mamdani. Zohran Mamdani's political platform is not a collection of disparate policies. It is a direct and fearless confrontation with the established order. Its power lies in its coherence as a rebuttal to the political currents that have defined the last decade. At its core is a relentless challenge to the legacy of Trumpism, an ideology he treats not as a historical anomaly, but as a persistent threat woven into the American political fabric. Mamdani's approach goes beyond simple opposition to a single figure. He meticulously deconstructs and counters the ideological architecture of Trumpism, the anti-immigrant sentiment, the dog whistle appeals to white nationalism, and the normalized Islamophobia. Where Trumpism seeks to build walls, Mamdani's platform advocates for sanctuary cities and expanded rights for all residents, regardless of documentation. Where Trumpism thrives on austerity and division, he proposes a social democratic vision of universal public goods, housing, healthcare, education, as the antidote, arguing that a society that cares for all its members is the strongest defense against the politics of hate. For him, this is not just policy, it is a personal and political imperative, a direct response to a movement that targeted his community and people who share his background. This confrontation with normalized ideologies is nowhere more pronounced or politically perilous than in his unwavering stance on Palestine and Israel. In the high-stakes arena of New York City politics, where the mainstream Democratic Party has long maintained a staunchly pro-Israel consensus, Mamdani's position is a radical departure. He does not mince words, openly using the term apartheid to describe the Israeli government's treatment of Palestinians and publicly endorsing the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, or BDS. It is a political calculus of immense risk, one that invites ferocious opposition from powerful lobbying groups and alienates more moderate elements within his own party. Yet he navigates this minefield not by softening his position, but by reframing it. He meticulously builds coalitions with progressive anti-Zionist Jewish groups, such as Jewish Voice for Peace, arguing that the struggle for Palestinian liberation is an integral part of a universal struggle for human rights. By doing so, he separates the actions of a state from the identity of a people, and positions his advocacy not as an attack on any faith, but as a consistent application of his principles of justice and anti-colonialism. This ability to navigate complex ideological terrain is also reflected in his relationship with the very community he represents. Zohran Mamdani's role within New York's Muslim community is multifaceted. He is both a reflection of its new confidence and a catalyst for its mobilization. He has successfully activated a demographic that was historically underengaged politically, not by appealing solely to religious identity, but by demonstrating that a proud Muslim can be an effective champion for a broad, secular, working-class agenda. However, this relationship is not without its complexities. The Muslim community in New York is not a monolith. It is ideologically diverse, containing deeply conservative elements that may disagree with his socialist economics or his progressive social views. Yet, Mamdani's support within this community remains strong, built upon a strategic understanding. Many who may not share his entire worldview see him as an authentic, powerful, and uncompromising defender of their civil rights and dignity in the public square. For a community that has endured decades of being politically voiceless and vulnerable, having a champion who fights fearlessly against Islamophobia is often the overriding priority. His support, therefore, is not a simple endorsement of socialism, but a complex negotiation, an alliance rooted in the belief that he is their most effective shield and their sharpest sword in the fight for recognition and justice. The significance of Zohran Mamdani lies in how he is fundamentally redefining what it means to be a Muslim politician in America. For years, the path to acceptance for minority politicians often involved a politics of assimilation, downplaying specific cultural or religious identities to appear non-threatening to a mainstream electorate. They were often framed as politicians who just happened to be Muslim. Mamdani inverts this paradigm entirely. He is instead a politician for whom his identity as a Muslim, the lived experience of his community, its history of marginalization, and its core ethical teachings, is a primary source of his political mandate. He draws from a deep well of Islamic principles, the imperative for social justice, the dignity of the poor, the duty to speak out against oppression, and translates them into a secular socialist language of universal rights. He argues that the fight for a $15 minimum wage is an extension of the fight for workers' dignity, a value cherished in his faith. This is the key to his success. He frames the fight against Islamophobia not as a special interest, but as an inseparable part of the broader struggle against racism, poverty, and state violence. By doing so, he has proven that a leader who is unapologetically Muslim can build and lead a powerful multiracial, multi-faith coalition, united not by a shared creed, but by a shared vision for a more equitable society. The impact of this new model of leadership is not abstract. It is tangible and is reshaping the political DNA of New York City. A powerful ripple effect is evident in the corridors of local power. A new wave of Muslim Americans, inspired by his success and armed with his playbook of grassroots organizing, are now running for office at every level, from local school boards to the city council and the state assembly. This has been accompanied by a quantifiable surge in civic engagement. Voter registration drives in mosques and community centers are more frequent and effective, and new political action committees have formed to ensure the community's voice is not just heard, but is also a deciding factor in tight elections. Perhaps most significantly, issues once confined to the advocacy of the Muslim community have been mainstreamed into the city's core progressive agenda. The fight against police surveillance is no longer seen as just a Muslim issue, but as a fundamental issue of privacy for all New Yorkers. The call for public schools to recognize religious holidays like Eid is now a standard plank in progressive platforms, seen as a basic matter of inclusivity. This is the awakening in action. The community's concerns are becoming the city's concerns. It is crucial, however, to define the nature of this awakening with precision. This is a political and civic awakening, not a theological one. The goal is not to infuse governance with religious dogma, but to empower a community to fully participate within a secular, democratic framework, using its shared values as a powerful mobilizing tool. The leaders of this movement are not imams seeking to interpret religious law, but organizers and legislators seeking to write civic law that protects and uplifts all citizens. The discussions taking place are about housing policy, not Sharia, about funding for public schools, not religious schools. It is about leveraging a shared identity forged by faith, culture, and a collective experience of post-9/11 America to demand a seat at the table, not to overturn the table itself. In essence, this awakening is the story of a community claiming their full rights as citizens, not to create a separate religious polity, but to perfect the promise of a pluralistic American democracy. Victory at the ballot box is not an endpoint. It is the beginning of a far more complex and arduous struggle. As Zohran Mamdani and the movement he represents pivot from campaigning to governing, they face a formidable array of entrenched powers for whom their agenda is not just a political disagreement, but an existential threat. The first line of resistance comes from the titans of New York's economy. The powerful real estate lobby, which has shaped the city's skyline and its housing policy for a century, views his platform of universal rent control, social housing, and aggressive tenant protections as a direct assault on their business model. They are prepared to spend millions on lobbying and public relations campaigns to paint his policies as reckless and destructive to the city's growth. Allied with them are the interests of Wall Street, who see in his democratic socialist ideals a dangerous push for higher corporate taxes and stricter financial regulations that could challenge the city's status as a haven for capital. But the opposition is not just external. Perhaps the most potent challenge comes from within his own political home, the moderate establishment wing of the Democratic Party. For decades, this faction has controlled the city's political machinery through a careful balance of corporate-friendly policies and incremental social progress. Mamdani's unapologetic radicalism, his willingness to challenge donors, and his confrontational stance on deeply sensitive issues like Israel are seen as a destabilizing force. They view him as a threat to their power, an electoral liability in broader contests, and a symbol of a leftward lurch they are desperate to contain. This sets the stage for a protracted internal war, fought in budget negotiations, in backroom deals, and in the media, where the full weight of the party apparatus could be mobilized to isolate him and obstruct his agenda. Yet, the most profound challenges may not come from these external forces, but from the inherent difficulties of translating a movement into a government. The very qualities that make for a successful activist, uncompromising idealism, a confrontational posture towards power, and the ability to mobilize grassroots energy, can become liabilities within the rigid machinery of governance. The critical question now becomes, can the raw energy of street-level activism be effectively channeled into the slow, bureaucratic, and often frustrating work of passing legislation and implementing policy? Governing requires compromise, coalition building, and a deep understanding of arcane administrative systems, skills that are not always prioritized in a protest movement. The friction between the demands of the movement and the realities of the institution will be a constant source of tension. This leads to the central tightrope Mamdani must walk, the razor's edge between idealism and pragmatism. Every decision he makes will be scrutinized by both his supporters and his opponents. If he remains rigidly attached to his most ambitious ideals, he risks political isolation and legislative paralysis, accomplishing little and potentially discrediting his entire political project as ineffective. However, if he compromises too much, if he moderates his positions to appease the establishment or makes deals that dilute his core principles, he risks being seen as a sellout by the very people who propelled him to power. This is the fundamental paradox of the outsider who makes it inside. How do you reform a system without being co-opted by it? how he navigates this treacherous path, balancing the purity of his principles with the political pragmatism required to deliver tangible results, will ultimately determine whether this awakening leads to lasting structural change or becomes just another chapter of unfulfilled political promise. Ultimately, the true measure of Zohran Mamdani's impact and the legacy of the New York Muslim awakening will likely not be found in the fine print of specific bills he passes or the budgets he helps negotiate. While those legislative achievements will be important, his most profound and enduring legacy is less tangible but far more powerful. It is the fundamental expansion of New York's political imagination. For a generation of New Yorkers, particularly within the Muslim community, the ceiling of political possibility had been set tragically low, defined by the trauma of 9/11 and the subsequent years of surveillance and suspicion. The goal was to be accepted, to be tolerated, to not be seen as a threat. The idea of a proud, unapologetic Muslim socialist leading a multi-racial working-class coalition and winning on a platform that openly challenged the city's most powerful interests was, for many, simply unthinkable. Mamdani and the movement that elevated him did not just break through that ceiling, they shattered the entire structure. They proved that it was possible to run and win, not in spite of one's identity, but because of it, by framing it as a source of moral clarity and a mandate for universal justice. His victory transformed the very definition of what is politically possible, recalibrating the boundaries of electability and providing a powerful proof of concept for a new way of building power. The previously impossible was now a political fact. Because of this, the story of the New York Muslim awakening, with Zohran Mamdani at its vanguard, offers more than just a new chapter for a single community in a single city. It offers a potential blueprint for the future of progressive politics in America itself. In an era of deep national division and political disillusionment, this movement provides a compelling template for how to win. It is a model that rejects the cautious, centrist politics of the past in favor of a bold, morally unambiguous vision. It demonstrates how to build a formidable coalition, not by watering down principles, but by showing how the specific struggles of one community against racism, surveillance, and economic exploitation are fundamentally linked to the struggles of all working people. It is a playbook that proves that a politics rooted in authentic identity and universal solidarity can mobilize a grassroots army capable of overcoming the immense power of organized money and entrenched interests. This is a story that suggests the most marginalized voices, once organized, confident, and unafraid, possess the unique moral authority and political energy required to not only define the next chapter for themselves, but to write it for everyone. Thanks for watching until the end. I hope it was useful. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.